I don't think a lot of people are gonna like this one, but here we go. Breast Cancer Show Ever is an episode of South Park that I consider to be one of the weakest in the show's history. Not for its message, but for how Wendy and Cartman are written, executed, and what they're meant to represent. I'm not saying that Wendy is in the wrong. She's definitely in the right here. But the problem I have with her execution in this episode goes into a larger problem I have with how people view female characters in the media in general. Female characters are either written to be always right and present unproblematic behavior, and the problem with defining female characters in this way is that the concept of good and evil are entirely fabricated concepts meant to stereotype behaviors into boxes in order to reduce the moral complexity of the issues being represented. And it's also just a very sexist way to view women, because as a human being, you will make mistakes, and the ability to make mistakes is part of your experience. Like, it's a very crucial part of being alive to be able to learn how to treat other people, how other people want to be treated, and how you see yourself in the eyes of other people. And these reductive views when it comes to viewing, especially women, are just not helpful when it comes to discussing media. And all of this isn't even discussing with the way Cartman has been utilized in the series. There is a reason that I say Cartman's utilization in this episode is one of his weakest appearances, because when Cartman is written at his best, he represents a child who has been suckered into incredibly bad beliefs because of the society he exists in. But there was an era of South Park history that I don't know if they've completely left. I think they are trying to shed this perception of Cartman, where he was just a blanket stand in for alt right talking points, and that's just inherently not a very interesting character. His original characterization of someone who just ended up picking up bad beliefs because of the people he was surrounded by is a lot more interesting than a character who just regurgitates alt-right talking points because of some perceived reputation that this character just exists in the show to represent these bad ideas, when that is not the full picture of who Cartman is. But because I don't expect all of you to have the context of Wendy and Cartman as characters, as you engage with this video, because who knows, you might just be here because you saw a funny little video title and wonder what I had to say. Me, notorious craphead. Okay, so before we can really get into the breast cancer show ever, we have to talk about Wendy's early season appearances. And big compliment to Matt and Trey here. In seasons 1 to 3, she is at her most interesting as a character, and I also attribute that to the voice talents of Mary Kay Bergman. This is not to diminish the voice talents of anyone who has voiced Wendy afterwards. April Stewart, you're doing a fantastic job, and I love you. I want to call attention to this voice actress because she is one of the Mary Kay Bergman is one of the reasons I grew to love South Park so much. She is very phenomenal at breathing life into these characters. Her talents, I feel, should be preserved for all time, and oh my god, I just love her so much. Rest in peace, Mary Kay Bergman. Her first appearance in the show is in the pilot episode. Cartman gets an anal probe, or the unaired pilot, whichever one you prefer. And her role in the episode is small, but it will be significant as to characterize her future appearances. Despite the fact that she's presented just as Stan's love interest, and the episode kind of implies that will be her only role, she is the one to give the idea of using Cartman as bait to lure the aliens out, which establishes how intelligent she is as a character. In Weight Gain 4000, Matt and Trey actually do a very good job of characterizing Wendy fast and efficiently. She enters an essay writing competition, but Cartman wins because he plagiarizes Henry David Thoreau's Walden. Weight Gain 4000 not only does a good job of establishing Wendy as a character, she's very intelligent, but she's also very proactive, which are two traits about her that will become very prominent as the series lives. And, but this isn't the entire picture. So I've been avoiding talking about Wendy's relationship with Stan, and that's for a multitude of reasons that I may get into here, I may not get into. But what I want to call into attention here is how shallow Wendy can be when she's around other women, and how desperately she does seem to prioritize her relationship with Stan to a point of actual mental illness. It has been implied that Wendy hasn't had the best time in South Park. Weight Gain 4000 is emblematic of that. South Park doesn't pull any punches about how terrible of a place South Park is. And Weight Gain 4000 is one of the first real inklings you get as an audience member that this place really does suck. And that can just draw out the worst in anybody, no matter what your situation is or where you happen to be in your life. In the episode Pink Eye, Wendy and Stan agree sometime off screen to come to the costume contest as Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy. Stan comes dressed as Raggedy Andy, but Wendy chickens out at the last moment because she quote unquote realized how stupid she would look and thought Stan would come to the same conclusion. She couldn't even give him the due grace of telling him beforehand. It's a very interesting moment because it does characterize Wendy as someone who cares a lot about what other people think. Her image matters to her regardless of how smart she is. And this is something that we see in the latest special, not with her as a character, but with her mother, Alexis. That is, however, a different video essay and might be reserved for another time because I cannot continue to go on that specific tangent. And one of the worst things Wendy does in the series is send their substitute teacher, Miss Ellen, to the moon because she thinks that she will steal Stan away from her, despite the fact that Miss Ellen is an adult woman who is also canonically a lesbian. And her lesbianism to this episode is only relevant as far as Chef trying to date her, because she would never touch Stan in any way, shape, or form because he is a 10-year-old boy. Don't be disgusting. I will actually attack you. Wendy's jealousy and her flakiness are really only relegated to her early season appearances, which I think is a tremendous shame because it does a lot to scrub the complexities of her character away. There are, of course, other episodes in this series that do feature her flakiness, pettiness, and her insecurity, as much as it relates to Stan, as much as it relates to the society that made her feel this way. But the point of this little introduction is that people might not know who Wendy is, and I wanted to give a lot more context as to why I feel about the breast cancer show ever that I do. There's a lot of Wendy that gets scrubbed after an episode called The List, where she gets scrubbed of a lot of her moral complexities because I really couldn't tell you why. I would need to be in the writer's room. But I sincerely hope that this quaint little introduction to Wendy as a character is enough to describe why I don't like the breast cancer show ever as a South Park episode. Cartman as a character is one who needs far, far less introduction. He is one of South Park's most famous characters for good reason. He's very well written, and what he represents is something that a lot of people resonate with. But an episode that I might actually consider, or an episode of this, what I'm going to informally call the South Park Character Diegesis podcast, is the mythology of Cartman and how he more often than not does get misunderstood by people who are the target of criticism or don't understand exactly what is being criticized, which is a real shame because I think at least up until Scott Tenorman Must Die, the commentary with his character was very, very strong. It was very obvious that Matt and Trey wanted to present this little chubby kid who had a mother who slept around, who was ostracized not only because of that fact, but also because he was fat. Like, Cartman's family represents this very, very seedy ideological underbelly to South Park of a lot of the attitudes towards women who sleep around and how they raise their kids. Like Leanne spoils Cartman, that's canon, and that's why he's fat. It's implied very heavily in these early seasons that a lot of his more terrible beliefs come from her. Like that commentary is at its strongest in these early seasons, but especially when Cartman makes a comment in Volcano where he claims that his mother said that there are a lot of black people in Africa. This is a comment that you're supposed to pay attention to because in Pink Eye, he is seen adorned in racist costumes, and that is only because of the negligence of his mother and the people around him. So here's the thing. I don't think that Cartman becoming a talking point for alt-right beliefs to be a problem in and out of itself. It reads as a natural evolution of his character. What I do have an issue with is Cartman as a cultural icon. The problem with Cartman becoming a talking point for alt-right beliefs is that general audiences, even people in the fan space who do participate in these discussions, have basically relegated Cartman to just be the alt-right point talking guy when that in and out of itself is an extremely detrimental and quite frankly blatant misrepresentation of his character. It does a lot to undo all of the character work that Matt and Trey set up for Cartman early in the show. It's just so blatantly untrue that it makes my head spin. It makes me wonder if people did engage with the earlier parts of the show to extrapolate that specific reading. Like, what are you talking about? It reads as people who jumped into the show at a very specific point in time, or people who didn't understand the earlier character setup that was done for Cartman to reach this point. So when you have the least interesting versions of both of these characters, Cartman as the straw man alt-right talking point guy, and Wendy as the unproblematic feminist just duking it out in the playground in the final shot of the show, like, what am I supposed to think? All you've ostensibly given me is a fluff piece about how breast cancer should be taken seriously. And anybody with a working brain knows that breast cancer can be taken seriously. It's just such a dull episode in the legacy of this show that normally takes such entertaining routes on very complicated subject matter for them to just pull out what's one of their weakest episodes, all because of how straw man-y these characters come off as. Like, I wasn't joking when I said Cartman and Wendy were at their least interesting in this episode, which is really, really funny because there's an early season episode, and the last thing I'm going to talk about that I actually think does a better job of representing their dynamic and not making them strawmen than the breast cancer show ever, which is Chef Goes Nanners. I'm not actually going to talk about the plot of Chef Goes Nanners because you should just watch the episode. And it's not because one of my favorite all-time South Park characters is in the episode and has a bad opinion. No, that's not the reason why. You should just watch it because there's a lot of historical context to that episode and why it was written the way it's written that you should research for yourself. It's best whenever you're engaging with something to approach the art on its own terms to understand where it's really coming from. And I think South Park is one of the shows, one of the most well-written adult primetime shows that takes this mentality to its logical conclusion. This episode not only takes advantage of the fact that Wendy is an extremely smart kid, but it also takes full advantage of the fact that she's an extremely insecure and lonely girl who's been ostracized by a society that does not appreciate her intelligence. Cartman is able to see this in the way he interacts with Wendy and feels a camaraderie with Wendy because of this. They grow closer in the episode, not just because of their distance towards each other, but it's clear from the way that they interact that there is a baseline understanding of how much South Park sucks as a society that the two share and exercise in their interactions with each other. It's actually pretty sweet to see. Cartman only joins Wendy's side so that he can mess with her, but in their proximity with each other, the two of them start developing feelings for each other. Feelings that are insinuated by the show to be of a romantic nature. And this might be the first time that I talk about my all-time favorite South Park episode. If you know me, you know what it is. It's the Mexican staring frog of southern Sri Lanka. And the reason that the Mexican staring frog of southern Sri Lanka is my all-time favorite South Park episode is not only does it feature my all-time favorite South Park characters in the spotlight, but also I think it's the first South Park episode to achieve all of the goals that it set out for itself in the beginning. So in this, there's a flashback in the Mexican staring frog of southern Sri Lanka where a character pulls out a sword and then jumps on a horse. A horse that looks suspiciously similar to a horse that appears in Wendy's fantasies when she's dreaming about Cartman taking her away. And there isn't any other way to read these scenes other than stalwart romanticism, which is one of Wendy's most important and most defining traits. She is an idealist and she's also a romantic. That's the biggest reason she's in love with Stan. Her relationship with Stan is based on what she considers to be this ideal version of what a man should be. Like, Stan is very open with his emotions. Like, if there's something he doesn't like, he will assert himself. He's very cynical, but he is one of the only South Park characters, and I suspect that this is also the reason why he is the main character of the show, to not really want to deal with other people's nonsense in the way that a lot of other characters do, but don't speak up for themselves whenever they do so. Like, Stan not only is the least tolerant of other people's, like, tomfoolery, but he will also, like, assert himself in these situations. And as a side note, if you want to know why Stan and Kyle are so different as characters, while Stan has very little tolerance for other people's tomfoolery, Kyle has actually been established by the show to be very, very, very willing to put up with anyone's tomfoolery if he can do it for the good of someone else. I have like a loving nickname for this horse because not only is it tied with like two of my all-time favorite South Park characters, but also this horse only appears when someone is falling in love with someone else. I very lovingly called this horse the Arrows horse. And season 2's Mexican staring frog of southern Sri Lanka and season 4's Chef Goes Nanners are the only times that this character has shown up. So it's pretty special when he has. The inherent romanticism of Wendy and Cartman's interactions in this episode is why Wendy ends up kissing Cartman in one of the final scenes of the episode, in front of Stan even. It's pretty shocking. But it absolutely makes sense because you and I, as people who have watched this episode, now have the context for why it happened. And this is also why I think it's a superior episode to the breast cancer show ever, for how willing it is to say that the concepts of good and evil are more nuanced than what South Park was presenting in some of its later years. If there's one lesson that I want all of you to take from this little diatribe, it's that a character should always come before a message.